We would like to begin this afternoon's conversation with a land acknowledgement. The University of San Francisco Hilltop campus sits on the unceded ancestral land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We all benefit from our connections to this place and take this moment to recognize the strong cultural heritage that has survived colonization and genocide and honor Ohlone artists, past, present, and future. Thacher Gallery staff would also like to take this opportunity of coming together to express our support of students, colleagues, and community members who are suffering from the recent acts of anti-Asian and anti-Black racism and violence in our communities and on our campus. As always, I'd like to thank all of the artists, the engineering faculty and students, as well as the selection committee and gallery team who have made Pulled Apart possible. This event is co-hosted by the Department of Engineering and the Center for Research, Scholarly, and Artistic Excellence. This event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. And I hope you'll join us on Thursday, January 15th, from 6 to 8 p.m. for the laser conversation, Pulled Apart, Re-engineering and Repurposing Human Civilization, featuring artists Cynthia Hooper, Adam Chin, and Terry Burlier, with UC Berkeley philosophy professor John Campbell and cultural historian Piero Scaruffi. Don't forget to visit the online exhibition, and links will be in the chat. In Pulled Apart, we experience works by artists whose practices include or examine computer technologies, mechanical devices, and larger infrastructures to reveal the seen and unseen systems that help shape society. Today, we'll be hearing from Adam Chin and Carrie Hott in conversation with computer sciences and engineering professor Christopher Brooks. They will be speaking about technology, coding, machine learning, and bringing into focus the cyber systems we do not always see, and asking questions about trust, algorithms, and reality, among many other things. Adam Chin is a fine art photographer who spent a career as a computer graphics artist for TV and film, working on such films as Shrek 2, Madagascar, and How to Train Your Dragon. He studied photography and printmaking under Barry Umstead at RayKo Photography in San Francisco. He currently practices using machine learning neural networks trained on databases of real photography to render new images. The photographs you see in Pulled Apart ask us to consider, what does a pixel know? Carrie Hott is an interdisciplinary artist based in Oakland, California. She has presented her work as part of exhibitions and projects across the country, most recently at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Recology San Francisco, and the Museum of Capitalism in Oakland. She is the recipient of the Artadia Award, a Cultural Humanities grant, and has had residencies at Mills College and Headlands Center for the Arts. She currently teaches in USF's Department of Art and Architecture and UC Berkeley's Department of Art Practice. Through a series of 5 videos featuring an evolving room and a lone voice seeking information from her smart device, Carrie Hott asks, where are we in relationship to the edges of the systems that surround us? Christopher Brooks is a professor in the Department of Computer Sciences at USF with a joint appointment in the Department of Engineering. His research examines the ways in which human and computational agents learn in shared environments. He develops new techniques for effective teaching of computer science and AI, and is deeply invested in addressing issues at the nexus of social justice and computing. He contributed written responses to both artists for the online exhibition. With this, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Adam.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me? Good. Yeah, my name's Adam, and I'm an artist, and what I work at right now is I combine photography with artificial intelligence. I've been doing computer graphics professionally since the early 1980s. And throughout my entire career, I've always worked at the intersection of art and technology. About 5 years ago, I, um, I asked this question when this whole AI thing started, and I was wondering, can you make pictures with AI? And it really wasn't clear at the time. And so I went off and did some research, found out, yes, you can make pictures with AI. It's really difficult. And I ended up taking 2 online courses in machine learning. And then you have to go out and find databases of photographs to train your neural net on in order for you to produce new photographs. So what I'm going to do is show you 2 series of work that I've made and talk about some of the issues that I encountered trying to make pictures with sort of a new medium. Okay, so I'm going to share here. Give me a moment. Okay, and okay, so here is the first sequence that I made. It's called Front and Profile. And what I did was I found a database of archival photographs from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. And this is the federal government. And they maintain databases for AI researchers to test their algorithms on. And this is, hang on, next picture. There we go. Okay, so this is what I made. After training the neural net on all these archival mugshots, I now take new mugshots and I input one view and try to predict what the other view is going to be. And um, it's actually kind of working. It's kind of cool, really. Um, and But there were issues with this, and there were actually big issues with it. And the first issue that I found was that when I looked at this database from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, what I found was that virtually half the guys in the database were African American. So this database was racially biased. And um, not only that, I kind of felt like the guys in the database were sort of being exploited. I assumed all of them were dead. Most of these photos look like they're from somewhere between the 1930s and the 1970s or 80s. So I almost didn't do this project. I was so disturbed by this database, but I finally decided after about a year to go ahead and do it. And, and decided that it was my responsibility to talk about the problems that I saw with this. Um, One of the other problems that I noticed when I was doing the work was that there were protests going on in Hong Kong at the time, pro-democracy protests that the Chinese government was taking the closed circuit TV footage of the demonstrators in the subways and using facial recognition software on it, trying to ID the people. And what I realized that what I was working on was just one more step further. They're trying to put a label on the guy's name, a label on the guy's face, and I'm drawing pictures of the person. So, I became aware of the fact that, hey, I'm trying to make pictures sort of like in a figure drawing exercise, but it's really advancing a technology that can easily be abused. Um, and then sort of the last issue I had with it is the accuracy issue. The question is this picture that I'm drawing the right guy? So eventually, this picture is going to get sharper in the next couple of years, but it's still going to be an issue of, is this the right person? So as this technology gets picked up and used, I think there's going to be issues. Here is the next series that I did, and this is the series that we're showing in the show here. And this one doesn't have the issues like the last series. What I've done is made a series of portraits. And I've used this algorithm that you see here called Sagan. And you don't have to remember the name. That was just the scientific paper that I read that I used the algorithm. So what does Sagan do? Well, when you start learning machine learning, one of the first exercises that you do is this tutorial, and it's called the handwritten digits exercise. There is this database of handwritten digits, also maintained by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, same guys. And what the exercise is you read in this database, and then you teach your neural net to draw digits just like these. And it's an iterative process. Okay, so you know, the neural network goes through and tries to make a stab at drawing the digits, and you say, do it again, do it again, do it again. And after about 10,000 cycles or whatever, you know, the digits evolved. So I thought, okay, what if I replace this database with 800 pictures of myself? So I one day I went and took 800 pictures of myself, and I made this self-portrait of me. So this is in the course of training. What happens is that I generate about 10,000 of these photos of myself. And out of these 10,000, I picked these 16. Okay, so these are what I think look like me. And that's sort of the point of uh, this exercise, is that this last step, and here's pictures of my friend Joel, but this last step where you pick 16 pictures out of 10,000, that's the step that the computer can't do. That's the human step. The computer can try to generate 10,000 images of the guy, but only a person can say, yeah, that's an image of Joel, and you know, those other 9,000, that's not Joel. Here's another one of my friend Dina, and one of the interesting things about what I did when I shot Joel and Dina, it was during the COVID, it was during the quarantine, and we didn't want to get close to each other in order to shoot the 800 photos. So what I did was I had a remote controller to the camera, and I gave them the remote controller so they could trigger the camera themselves. And essentially what they did was take 800 selfies of themselves. And Dina actually didn't even want me to watch. She told me to walk away. And so I walked away, and she took the 800 photos. And the interesting thing, and this is a real benefit, is like she took better photos of herself than I could have taken. You know, because it was a selfie, she chose what she wanted to reveal to the camera. And even that emotion comes through even after this AI blender this all goes through. Okay, and so this is one more. This is pictures of Obama. And I downloaded 1,200 pictures of Obama from Flickr. These are the Pete Souza photos from the White House. And this only got 4 images that I felt were Obama out of the 10,000 that I generated. It was a much harder task. This is a self-portrait I made in the first week of the quarantine last year. And that was that was because, you know, you have all day. I have all day to take 800 photos of myself. And finally, what I'm going to show you, here's some of the databases. These are some of the 800 photos that I took of myself that are fed into the neural net. And here are some of the photos of Obama that I downloaded from Flickr that fed into for his photo. And you can see his photos are much less consistent. That's why it was so hard for the computer algorithm to converge on a coherent image of Obama. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to go on to Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. All right, I'm also going to share my screen, so bear with me for a second here. Okay. 1 minute. Just waiting for this. There we go. All right, hopefully that's coming through. So here you're actually seeing an image of work in progress, and I'm going to come back to this. My name is Carrie Hott, and I am, as Glory introduced, artist in Oakland, and I also teach at USF, and I'm very happy to be a part of this exhibition. So I'm going to talk through the process of creating these 5 videos together called Room of Edges, which is my work in the exhibition. And this series portrays one evolving room that becomes increasingly disjointed and unkempt as the series proceeds. And the audio in each video conveys this building conversation between a human and a couple of artificially intelligent home assistants or smart home devices. And so I'll be playing excerpts from each one, very short excerpts, and then talking through my process as we go, beginning with the first one. Are you there?
Hi, what can I do for you?
What causes an eye twitch?
On the website VSP.com, they say, fatigue, stress, eye strain, and caffeine or alcohol consumption seem to be the most common sources of eye twitching. Eye strain, or vision-related stress, can occur if you need glasses, a change in prescription, or are consistently working in front of a computer.
So for folks who don't know my practice as well, I do work in large-scale sculptural installation. So as you may have noticed, the rooms contain small-scale miniature objects. There's also digitally composited objects in these scenes as well. So I wanted to show here an installation that I created prior to this. This was a site-specific installation at YBCA in 2018 that was actually a human scale kind of architectural model that explored my research and kind of direct experiences with electrical power plant infrastructure and internet infrastructure. So I'm showing this because prior to this project, I had been working with small scale miniature objects. And I had also begun researching emerging smart technology, home devices that are appliances, but also connected to the internet. So these began as these separate but parallel threads in my practice. So like Adam, I sort of reoriented a bit or changed the way I work a bit in quarantine and in the pandemic. So in the context of this time of being isolated and reorienting to work within the smaller space of my studio, I began to make these small rooms and started to think about these as installations and obviously a much smaller scale, but also as possibly sets for videos. And at the same time, I was actually having conversations with a Google Home and with an Alexa. And I found a few of these and started to record my conversations that I was having with them to just see what would happen. And I started to think about how these conversations could drive a narrative on top of these sets or scenes. So going back to the series, I'm going to continue to play. I'm going to play a very short excerpt of it for the second one, but you'll notice it's the same room, just slightly different.
Tell me about whales.
According to Wikipedia, whales are a widely distributed and diverse group of fully aquatic placental marine mammals. They are an informal grouping within the infraorder Cetacea, usually excluding dolphins and porpoises. Whales, dolphins, and porpoises belong to the order Cetartiodactyla, which consists of even-toed ungulates.
So as I worked on this project, I would get pretty far into one video and then start a second video, have more conversations, rearrange the room, start to record it. So this project definitely grew over time, and a back and forth started to emerge between me and, in this case, a Google Home, which is what I started out with, a Google Home Smart Assistant. And it really became a form of collaboration as I saw it. The responses from the Google Home started to propel the decisions I would make about the next scene in the room. So here you can see posters about whales in this scene, which is after the last one we watched. So I had an overarching vision for the narrative, but I started to think about how the algorithm of the Smart Assistant might operate within this project. And I had been doing research outside of this, thinking about how algorithms increasingly shape our lives in ways that sometimes, or at least that I'm surprised to know about. So this became a way of acknowledging this kind of new reality and also playing with this technology.
Oh, can you turn on a different light?
To change the brightness of your lights, say dim night light, or set desk lamp to 50%, or brighten lights by 10%.
So you start to hear more and more sound. So I was asking the different assistants in the room to play different nature sounds, just building and building the kind of mediated experience that they can offer. This project was also a way for me to think through something I constantly think about, which is the very invisible nature of our technology. We obviously see our devices, but they're very smooth and elegant, and we don't really see much more than their surface. So I'm very curious about how we're not really invited to think about exactly how they work, like what's happening inside, the information they collect, who made this object, right? Where did the materials come from? And beyond that, the infrastructure that they rely on. They obviously need electricity. They also need internet. So this dynamic is very interesting to me. It's, they're clearly really handy, but we have a very dependent relationship on them that's pretty uneven. And this is just an ongoing curiosity for me, and this project became a way to explore that. So we have two more excerpts. I'm gonna play an excerpt from part 4.
Why isn't my lamp working?
On the website removeandreplace.com, they say, if your lamp does not illuminate, then a faulty bulb, a faulty power outlet, a faulty switch, a faulty light socket, a faulty plug, a faulty brass tab, or a faulty cord may be the issue.
So handy, right? So building on what she just said, there were many other considerations as part of this project. I was actually watching a lot of DIY home building shows, and if you know anything or are interested at all in that genre, you know that there are so many. I was also watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I was just thinking a lot about all of the information that we have access to. We have access to, just many of us, right? Like if you seek it, you will find it, it's there. But I wonder about the depth of that information. I wonder about how it's organized. And how, with all of that, how much do we actually understand about our home environments, let alone beyond us in the environments around our home. So these factors in combination with what is a longer track of my interest in the history of the electrical grid, the internet as it now sort of becomes woven into our infrastructure and everything, this really informed my thinking around this work, alongside my Home Assistant collaborators, Google Home and Alexa. So I'm going to play an excerpt from the last video, and then I will conclude.
I found 14 on the website homestratosphere.com. They say parts of a table lamp was invented around 70,000 BC. A hollow rock.
Here's what I found on Land's Wikipedia page. LAMP is a very common example of a web service stack, named as an acronym of the names of its original 4 open source components: the Linux operating system, the Apache HTTP server, the MySQL relational database management system, and
you
the
find a
PHP programming
meditation?
language. The LAMP components are largely interchangeable and not limited to the original selection.
Let's get sleep sounds.
Welcome to Sleep Sounds. To play a sound,
On the
just say
website
play and then the name
solarschools.net,
of
they
the
say.
sound.
All right, thank you all so much. That is the end of my piece.
Okay, thanks to both of you, Carrie and Adam. So my name's Chris Brooks. I'm a professor here at USF. And as Gloria said at the beginning, I teach in the computer science department and also in engineering. I see some students in the crowd, so hi everybody. So I teach artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's my background area. And so what I was going to do is spend a few minutes just kind of providing some reactions, some thoughts that I have come based on Adam and Carrie's work. And then I have some questions prepared, and I want to encourage you all in the audience to add questions as well. I know some of you have already submitted questions. I got them, great. If you have other ones, feel free to start putting them in the Q&A. Get some stuff built up. In a few minutes, we'll turn to that. But let me just bring up a couple slides here to sort of ground my own ideas. And of course, those of you I have as students are well familiar with me fighting my way through Zoom while I do this. So one thought that came to mind right away for me, and I'm not going to talk a lot about the technical side of how things work. If folks want to know how a generative adversarial network is trained, Adam can speak to that in the Q&A, or I'm happy to talk about it. But I'm sort of more interested in these artistic questions right now. And Adam started out by asking us the question, what does a pixel know? And those of you who've been in my AI class know we talk a lot about knowledge. And I love this quote. Depending on who you ask, it's sort of a portmanteau of quotes by Frank Zappa and by Cliff Stoll, who's one of the inventors of the internet, and possibly Albert Einstein as well. But like all good internet things, its source is long gone. But it says data is not information. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is not understanding, and understanding is not wisdom. I feel like that's a really important thing for us as engineers to keep in mind. These are different things. And if we think about Adam's work, a picture is information. Information is data that's been organized together in a way to tell us something we didn't know before. We learned something that we didn't know by consuming it. But by itself, it's pretty low level. Computers can handle it pretty well. They can understand it, but they don't know what to do with it. When we start to put it in a context, when we start to relate it to other pieces of information that we know, then we start to talk about knowledge. And that's, I think, where Adam's work is so interesting to me, is we see these faces that are not faces, but we clearly recognize them. I can tell that that's Barack Obama, even though it doesn't really look like him. The one of Adam in the N95 mask really strikes me this way, that to me, as a human, when I see that having gone through the last year, I have a very specific emotional response to that. I don't think I could explain that to a computer, though. And I don't think I could even explain that to myself 2 years ago. If I'd seen that picture in 2018, my emotional reaction, my context would be very different. And Adam's work really provokes that for me. It makes me think about why it is that I have that response, even though, and keep in mind what's so interesting to me about neural nets is that's not a real image. That picture was never created. That is not a real person, right? It's pixels that have been stitched together through a pattern that form an image that we as the viewer interpret in a particular way. And we say, oh, that's Barack Obama, that's Adam Chin. That was never a real photo that was ever taken. It's completely synthetic. We impose our own meaning on it. I see the same thing happen with Carrie's work, which really intrigues me. In the classical AI world, we talk a lot about this idea of what are called scripts. This is a common technique in game programming as well, where you have an interaction. Psychologists also talk about this. If I walk into a restaurant and I walk up to the host station, I have a set number of reactions that I would expect. Maybe they'll seat me, maybe they'll hand me a menu, maybe they'll ask my name, but they're probably not going to hand me a lamb chop. They're probably not going to hit me in the face with a rubber mallet, and they're probably not going to hand me the check, right? If any of those interactions happened, I would be stepping outside of that script. I would not know what to expect anymore. In Carrie's work, you see a lot of that same interaction. A lot of what we see with home assistants is very scripted behavior, where they are expecting a particular kind of question, tell me the weather, play a song for me, things like that, and they give you a response back. And it's very comforting. And as Carrie said, we're sort of encouraged not to think too deeply about what's underneath the hood. But then when that script breaks, when we ask a question that's a little more complex, we're immediately alienated and taken out of that interaction and drawn to question why it is that that's happening. So I think that's a really powerful effect that I see in both their works, is this exposure to the fact that technology has its limits and it has its edges. And we're pulled apart from that technology when the context breaks down and we don't have the kind of interaction we're expecting to have, either with a picture or with our home assistant. To me, this all brings up this really interesting question about the relationship between AI and creativity, and software and creativity. And this is a question I'm going to ask both Carrie and Adam, because I'm really curious about their process. So how does this software aid or change the process? And I think about the work I've done myself. There's a procedural level at which it's interesting, because I can create new versions really quickly, or you can undo things, or you can cut and paste in a way that you couldn't with oil and paint. And that's great. But I'm really interested in that place where the software sits between the artist and the medium, or the artist and the viewer, and either by inserting some randomness or by driving the creative process in a particular way, it lets the artist kind of set their superego and their ego aside and maybe tap into different artistic expression that you wouldn't have gotten without that tool. You know, Adam talked about using the neural net to generate lots of different images and then applying his artistic eye to pick out what he thought were the right images. You know, Carrie talked about this when she talked about letting the algorithm drive her design. What's that like, to give over some control to an algorithm and let it drive your creative process? And then we've heard a lot about this idea of technology and illusion. You know, the modern world is very complex, and all the computer programmers out there know that we talk a lot about abstraction in our major. We talk a lot about APIs and the idea that we want to hide complexity from the user. And home assistants are a great example of that. They hide a lot of complexity until they don't. And then they break, and then we're forced to examine why that is. The other, I think, more pernicious thing to think about that Carrie's work really exposes, and I think we see it in Adam's as well, is that that layering, that abstraction, keeps us from associating directly with the reality in our lives. We're mediating everything through a screen or through a device or through some piece of technology rather than through direct reality. How does that affect the way we perceive the world? I think that question gets raised really deeply in both of these works. And then lastly, you know, some questions started to come up in the Q&A, and I thought I'd give my take on this anyway, which, and this is just my opinion, is, you know, algorithms are not good or bad. Technology is a tool. And it's up to us as engineers and designers and creators to figure out how to use them ethically. Those of you who've been in my Engineering 102 class, we read about Compass. If you don't know what Compass is a system that was developed originally for the state of Pennsylvania a few years ago. And the thought behind it was that judges were making decisions about who to let go on bail and who to leave imprisoned while they were waiting trial. And there was a fear that the judges might be biased. And so the thought was, well, let's instead introduce machine learning into the problem. And what was found was instead that the machine learning program was making the same sort of biases, or a different set of biases actually than judges were, but it was predicting that Black defendants should be incarcerated at a higher rate than white defendants. Now it's tempting to react to that and say, oh my God, that's an evil algorithm, it's terrible, we shouldn't use this. But if you dig a little deeper, what you find is that the algorithm itself is neutral. The problem is that the algorithm was being trained on data from past arrests, which were done in a racist way. So if you have police over-policing Black and brown neighborhoods, arresting people there at a higher rate than they do at white neighborhoods, and then you take that data and throw it into any algorithm and say, predict from that data who should be arrested, it's going to predict Black and brown people, not because they are committing crimes at a high rate, not because the algorithm is evil, but because the system that you're drawing the data from is racist in the first place. So to me, it's almost a cop-out to say, oh, this technology is bad, we shouldn't use it. You need to really examine the underlying system and address that Otherwise, whatever you build out of it is going to be racist. And, you know, we're a Jesuit university, and so I think a big piece of our mission is to consider the moral and ethical dimensions of what we build. And for me, such a big challenge in the computer world is that Moore's law, which says that computing is, well, actually what Moore said was that storage is going to double every 18 months, but it's been interpreted to mean computing power is going to grow exponentially. It seems to be true. It's not really a law, it's an observation, but that's fine. But I don't think our ethical growth goes at the same rate. I think our ethics seems to be going linearly, while technology is going exponentially. And so, but we have control over the slope of that curve. And so I think it's up to us as engineers and creators and scientists to push that curve up so that it tracks the growth of technology, or we're going to find ourselves in a place where we've built a lot of things that we didn't really expect to build. So I'm going to stop there as well, and maybe put it back to Adam and Carrie. I would love to get your take on, maybe let's start with this last question about the role of technology in our lives, and whether you see it as alienating or whether you see it as good or bad, or maybe neutral.
I guess I'll start. I worry about it. You know, I watch Carrie's videos, and you know, my thought, you know, and it's asked in the first video, I'm going, where are those answers coming from? And you know, I feel that we've allowed this thing into our lives. There's been a radical change in computing because of these AI systems in just even like the last 5 years, and we haven't caught up to it yet. There is so much, there's a real sea change about computing. So there's a lot to be thought about. And I think I talked to Chris in one of our earlier conversations. Up until 5 years ago, computers always answered, you know, 0 to 1, or it was a binary answer, true or false, yes or no, 0, 1, does it work, or either it works or it doesn't work. And now with AI, we get an answer which is, you know, given the data that I've seen, this is the most probable answer. And that's very different from true or false. So that's the dramatic difference to me.
Carrie, what do you think?
I really appreciated what you said about technology as a tool, because I agree, and I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, and there are so many benefits. And you know, speaking broadly about technology is tough because there's so many different ways to define it, so many different types of technology. But I do think I can say, in terms of the technology I'm interested in, the networked new technology I'm interested in, it's, for me, my concern is the decision-making process leading to the technology. And so can we separate those things? I don't know at this point, but I think it's the way that these items are made, and then once they're in our lives, how is our sense of agency within our environments impacted? And I'm very curious about that, just like objectively, but I'm also concerned, you know. But I'm very pro progress. I'm pro technology. I don't want to shame people for using these things, but I do hope that we're able to figure out something that feels more ethical. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I recently heard an artist who also works with a lot of smart technology, named Martine Sims, who I really appreciate. If people know who she is, I also recommend looking her up. And she said, I hope people use these objects more. I hope people use them more and more and more and more, because this is how we're going to be able to work this out. And this being many, many things. But, you know, a lot of these ethical considerations in terms of all of the inherent bias, but also how they're made, I think potentially, in that optimistic view, could become worked out. So that's my brief answer.
Oh, thank you. You know, I think sort of a related thread in here to unpack this a little bit more is around privacy and capitalism. And, you know, at one point, people often, for good reasons, get concerned that their data is going to be exposed, and that, you know, they don't have the privacy that they used to. And to some extent, I think that's probably true. You know, Carrie, I think about your work, but then there's this, I think, like slightly more subtle piece of it, that you're inviting Amazon or Google into your house, and that data that they're collecting is being used to sell you things. Maybe can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that of the devices I have, they never leave this room, and this is not where I live. And that's very intentional. I don't want to have any of the devices that are listening all the time, like many of these are. I don't actually want to break the wall or break the seal and bring them into my home. And because it's a part of my research, I'm very conscious of the underlying processes for how they work. And so I don't want to bring them into my home. I may have actually lost the thread of the beginning part of your question, but that's the first part of my
I think that's great. I think you got it.
Okay,
Adam, you also spoke about privacy from a little bit different lens when you were talking about the data sets that you discovered. And you know, you have these people's images that are being used in a new context and remixed or restructured, and you know, that wasn't that person's intent, or you know, maybe how they want to be presented. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and where that puts you as an artist?
Troubling. You know, it really was a troubling thing. This is something I had never encountered before. That in order to, you know, here, you know, I've got a new medium that I'm trying to walk and talk, to do something as simple as a figure drawing or a life drawing class. And all of a sudden I've walked in, you know, so this was never my intent, but I've walked into this place where I really feel like I'm violating these guys. You know, they never gave permission for this thing to be used like these are the mugshot, the mugshot guys. And we are seeing this happening about every 3 or 4 weeks in the newspaper. We get an issue, and right now it's about facial recognition, Clearview AI. They've scraped the web of all of our photos. They got them all. If you were on Facebook, they got them, and their law enforcement is starting to use it. There's already been like 3 or 4 cases where they've made mistaken arrests. You know, they've used this Clearview AI software, and invariably the person being arrested mistakenly has been African American. So, you know, these algorithms are just, you know, doesn't work very well on people of color. The other issues, then this Clearview AI most recently was used again during the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. And you know, the law enforcement has been using it to trace down the people who stormed the Capitol. So, so we are really in a whole new ballgame here. And for me, I guess the reason I started doing this was that I was just trying to extend photography. You know, I wanted to see what I could do with photography, and it just walked into just a room full of problems. And these are not problems that I had ever encountered really in the first 30 years of doing computer graphics. So.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn to a couple questions out of the chat here, if that's okay. So there's one, I'm not taking them in order, so I'm just picking the ones I like. So one question is about the term AI itself. And I agree with the questioner here. You know, that was originally invented in 1953 by John McCarthy, and machine learning as well is a terminology that's been around for a long time. It may not be the most accurate way of describing what this software does. And so I'm going to kind of paraphrase what they're asking here is, using that term, talking about these things as being intelligent and learning, do you think that obscures or affects the way that we perceive them or work with them? Or is it a useful piece of language to use?
I can begin.
Yeah, go for it, Carrie.
I mean, I think that this to me goes back to the opacity of the technology itself, and the way that the knowledge of how it works, and of how many of these devices work, how they have come to exist in our lives, how they're made, the things I'm repeating myself talking about. But it's both specialized knowledge, and I think also just the terms themselves have become incredibly loaded. And I'm an artist, I have art degrees, I came to understand technology in this way as a self-taught person in my adult life. It has taken a lot of time and investment, and not everyone has that time to understand, or interest, obviously. And so I don't have a solution, but I guess what I feel passionate about is that these terms are opaque, and that's real. And how much do we feel confident going in and trying to understand what they are? Because the terms are so loaded from the get-go that it's just sort of people just stop. So yeah, I'll pass it to Adam.
Yeah, I agree completely. I would say, I don't know what the right term for AI should be, but at least for machine learning, I think for me, the answer is, this is a probability-based response. Okay, so if we could replace that phrase, probability-based response, this is the most likely answer given the data set I've been trained on, and that's, of course, that's not going to go down into our language, but, that's what's going on here. And actually, I could get a little snarky here, but, after studying, the neural net, what it's doing, the usual response is there's no intelligence in here, and I still think that. So.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. A neural net's a fancy statistical pattern matcher. We as humans, I think, can impose a lot of meaning on that and say, oh my God, that's a picture of Barack Obama. It really just spit out a bunch of pixels to minimize the loss function.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick another question out of the chat here. There's so many good ones. Let's see. I'm going to go with this one from my friend Sean Calhoun, because I haven't seen him for a while. So Sean asks, is it possible that tech is not neutral? Some have termed algorithms as oppressive, like Clearview. Could you imagine an algorithm as liberatory? Interesting.
I can certainly imagine an if then that goes, the thens are, if then being the structure of a very simple algorithm for people who are less familiar with the structure. And maybe I'll say that I really appreciate the question, and I appreciate the challenge of thinking about that, the thens being liberatory as opposed to narrowing down. I cannot think of a specific example at the moment, but I feel really intrigued by that. And I love the idea, because we're so critical, and that's part of the practice, is being critical of technology as a way to talk about improving it. And I love the practice of trying to be optimistic within these conversations, and thinking about how technology can be used as a better tool.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, what's your, I have thoughts too, but I'm gonna let you go.
I don't have, a thought about an algorithm being, a positive result, but I did have thoughts about how to make this machine learning data set that we're training on more fair, and I know that, and I'm actually working on a project in my home right now, but the amount of work to go into that data set and make it, so you're never going to have an unbiased data set, but you can statistically, I think, make it more fair, but the amount of work to make that more fair is about 10 times more than the work of actually constructing the neural net. So to make a positive result requires really conscious effort, and about 10 times more work than just slap what you did to slap it together to start with.
Yeah, I would agree there. And we had a question in the Q&A about, can you make an unbiased algorithm? And I'm going to jump in and say no. But let me put an asterisk on that, that sometimes when we say bias, we don't mean what people say in the real world when they talk about bias. We can talk about bias as being something that's harmful, or we can talk about bias as just being the thing that helps you select between answers. And so as Adam said, machine learning is intended to be a probabilistic estimate. At some point you have to pick yes or no, right? For this unseen example that you haven't classified yet, you have to say something about it, and your bias is going to help you decide how to do that. It can be completely benign, like pick the shorter answer, or it can be, very harmful. And I completely agree with what Adam said, that it takes a lot of work and care to both identify all those implicit biases in your data and then to extract them out. I'm going to stick to what I said before about technology is neutral, because I feel like I can't change my opinion at this point. But say that people can use it in ways that are very liberatory. And I can certainly think of examples where people have used AI technology for things that are good, or to affect people in positive ways, whether it's detecting disease, for example. It's widely used in a lot of medical technology to do things like read radiographs and recognize tumors, or it's used in applications in the developing world, for example, to identify remote villages in India. I've seen people use machine learning technology to notice that, there's a village there that has not gotten water or sanitation or a road, and then aid workers know to get a road there. That feels to me like a liberatory use of a neutral technology. So I'm going to be Jesuit, and I'm going to humanize it and say that it's humans who are liberatory. Technology is just a tool, just like a shovel or a gun or a COVID shot. It can be used for good or bad. Let's see. Let me pick out another good question here. Let's see. This one's for Carrie, but I'm going to make all of them for Adam and for Carrie both. So in the interview, you talk about the technology around us giving us a sense of comfort and security, but the videos start out making us feel secure and safe, and then we kind of become more and more alienated and disaffected and pulled away from it. So what was your artistic choice in there, and maybe help us understand that a little better?
Sure, I can start off. Having the room start to come apart and the mediation, like the sounds in the room start to increase, was a pretty direct way for me to talk about what I was saying in my presentation, which was just the level of information and mediation that we have access to if given the choice. And even for myself, I'll notice that I'm kind of using like 3 or 4 devices at the same time, not even in my work, just in my life. And it's interesting to me that sort of becomes automatic, and I need to like kind of take a minute to notice that and think about what's happening. So it was intentional for me to go from something that feels calm to kind of like increase to the final video where the room is starting to come apart, and there are many voices in the room, so to speak, because that's kind of a way to symbolize that there are literally many voices and ears in the room. Last thing I'll say is I chose to have the room start to come apart as well, because like I said, I was thinking so much about like home improvement culture, which I think really grew quite a bit in the pandemic as well. And are we able to take things apart? We're invited to in a certain way as part of home improvement culture, but again, the depth of knowledge, I guess, is something to me that feels more scattered.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Adam, I feel like that question also exists in your work too. When I see the synthetically generated photos, normally you look at a picture of somebody and you resonate with it right away, and yours they're so clearly artificial, and yet they retain these human-like features because that's how a GAN works. It learns eyes and noses and things like that. Even though they're so distorted, I'm still looking for a person in there, but I feel very alienated and separated from it. Is that something you were trying for, or where'd that come from?
Now, I think this goes back to my experience actually in the early 1980s when we started with computer graphics. And I actually see that one of the guys who hired me out of college is out there. Hi, Glenn. We were just trying to make this new media walk, talk, and sing. You know, I mean, it was, you know, that was the most exciting thing, was like, can we get this thing on its feet and communicating and emoting? And that's where, you know, the company I was with was called Pacific Data Images at the time, and it was called PDI, and it became part of DreamWorks. And so that's how, you know, but those first couple of years is like, can we get this thing to emote? And it was, you know, and these are spheres and cubes, you know, Phong shaded. And so that's really the same approach that I was taking here with this medium, is like, can I get it to walk and talk? The fact that there is, you know, and, you know, so I have to go with what I get out of, you know, this thing, this paintbrush, you know, it's like trying to paint with a brick. You know, it's gonna just paint in certain ways and you just have to go with it. You know, it's just like, I've chosen this unwieldy process and we are just going to go with it.
Yeah. That leads really nicely into what I think is maybe the last question here, which I feel like we've got this great audience here. We've got some artists who are maybe a little interested in technology, hopefully. We've got some engineers and computer scientists who maybe are kind of curious about doing some art. What's your advice out there to this crowd? How do they combine these two media or these two different ideas and be creative in themselves? And, you know, what would you tell younger you, I guess, maybe what's your advice for them?
I would say, you know, just go for it. I mean, 30 years ago, we sat around challenging each other, just say, hey, let's make the coolest picture we could make. And this, we would spend all night there trying to make the coolest thing that we could think of. So I would say continue that, because that's the last talk that we had. People were talking about tinkering, the concept of tinkering, and I, back then I used the word play. You have to learn how to play with this stuff and to just manipulate it. The only difference now is that there are some weird ethical issues you can run into with the AI, and that is the change. That's the challenge of this era, unfortunately. And so you have to keep your eyes open to that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carrie, what do you think?
I really like your answer, Adam. Go for it. Big fan of that. I think following your interests is, you know, that's, I think, one of the best paths, because it's much more sustainable to be invested in a project focused on a subject you really, really love. I also am a big fan of taking things apart, not to like really literally pull from the name of the exhibition, but I really, I like to go somewhere and we're drowning in objects, we're drowning in devices. You can go to any thrift store, you can find something that isn't of deep value to you for the sole purpose of taking it apart. And I think that there's a lot to be gained from that, both directly and theoretically. And the last thing I'll say is thinking about technology as like a much broader term than what can be plugged in. And thinking about like, there's innovations that technology have been happening far, it's been happening for far longer than the electrical grid or the internet's been around. And I think sort of expanding our definitions of concepts can be really useful as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'll maybe just add one little thought on there that one thing I think is really exciting, I'm not that much younger than you, Adam, how easy it's gotten to access so much stuff now, stuff that used to take me, I'm playing with the Arduino here that we're going to use in Engineering 102 tomorrow. When I was in grad school, that would have taken me a whole semester to build, and I put it together in 10 minutes. That's incredible. So I guess my advice to students, you've probably heard me use the phrase productively lost before, but if you haven't, I think that's a good thing to try to cultivate, that idea that you're going to jump into something and you don't know quite how you're going to get out yet. but you know that you can get out. You know that you're going to be able to figure it out. It's different than unproductively lost, where you're just stuck and you don't know what to do. But you know that there are resources out there. There's people who's going to help you. You can figure it out. You have the internal strength to get through it. That is so powerful if you can get yourself into that place. So just, I'm going to teach myself this stuff. And I agree completely with what you said, Carrie, that it's got to be something you care about, right? It's got to be something you love, or you're not going to do it. At least if you're me, that's how it is. I'm not doing it unless I really am interested. And I think for all of you, you probably feel the same way. This has been such a great conversation. Thanks to both of you for being here. I feel like I could go for another hour, but I'm mindful that we're at time. So what I do want to do is remind our attendees that Carrie and Adam are going to be joining us again on the 15th for the laser series. I'm sorry, Gloria mentioned this at the beginning, but if you want more of this, that's a great place to go. And I would encourage you all to check out their work as well if you haven't. It's really challenging and thought-provoking stuff. And so let me just end by thanking both of you for being here, and thank all the audience for taking the time to be a part of this.
Thank you, Chris, so much for your
pleasure.
writing great questions. And thank you, Adam, for your work.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for attending. Everyone have a great evening, okay?
Thank you.